In 1378, the most powerful institution on earth did not just fracture, it imploded. For centuries, the papacy held absolute authority over kings, empires, and the souls of millions. But what happens when that ultimate power is hijacked? For nearly 40 years, the Christian world was torn apart. It was ruled not by one pope, but by two, and eventually, three. They excommunicated each other, they raised private armies, and they turned the Vatican into a geopolitical weapon. This is not a story of theology. This is the story of how the French monarchy took the papacy hostage, how Europe's kings used faith as a chessboard, and how the Catholic Church nearly destroyed itself from the inside. To understand how the system collapsed, you must first understand the sheer scale of papal authority in the Middle Ages. The Pope was not simply a religious leader, he was the ultimate sovereign. Popes could crown emperors, they could depose kings. Through the weapon of excommunication, they could isolate a monarch, release his subjects from their loyalty, and condemn his soul to eternal damnation. It was an unparalleled monopoly on divine authority. But absolute power attracts predators. And by the early 14th century, the greatest predator in Europe was the Kingdom of France. The crisis began decades before the actual schism. In 1305, a French archbishop was elected as Pope Clement V. Under intense political pressure from the French king, Philip IV, Clement made a decision that would alter the course of institutional history. He refused to move to Rome. Instead, in 1309, he moved the entire papal court to the city of Avignon, just outside the borders of the French kingdom. For nearly 70 years, the papacy remained in Avignon. All 7 popes during this period were French. The vast majority of the cardinals appointed were French. To the rest of Europe, the reality was obvious. The papacy was no longer a universal institution. It had become a puppet of the French crown. This period became known as the Babylonian Captivity of the Church. In Avignon, the papal court transformed. It became an administrative and financial empire. The bureaucracy expanded. Taxes were aggressively collected from across Christendom to fund a lavish, fortress-like palace. But the absence of the Pope left Rome in ruins. The ancient capital of the empire was reduced to a violent, lawless town controlled by warring noble families. The geopolitical imbalance was unsustainable. In 1377, Pope Gregory XI finally yielded to mounting pressure and returned the papacy to Rome. It was meant to restore order. Instead, it triggered a catastrophe. Just 1 year after returning to the decaying city, Gregory died. In April 1378, the College of Cardinals gathered in the Vatican to elect a new pope. The stakes were monumental. The French cardinals wanted to elect another Frenchman and return to Avignon. The Italian cardinals wanted to keep the papacy in Rome. But the decision would not be made in quiet deliberation. Outside the Vatican, a furious Roman mob surrounded the conclave. They broke into the papal cellars, drank the wine, and began violently demanding an outcome. Their chants echoed through the stone halls. "Give us a Roman, or at least an Italian." Terrified for their lives, the cardinals rushed the vote. They selected Bartolomeo Prignano, an Italian archbishop who took the name Urban VI. The mob was satisfied. The crisis seemed averted. But the cardinals had made a fatal miscalculation. Urban VI was expected to be a manageable, compliant placeholder. He was not. The moment the papal crown touched his head, Urban became a ruthless, authoritarian reformer. He publicly berated the cardinals, insulted their intelligence, and threatened to dilute their power by creating a massive wave of new Italian cardinals. The French cardinals realized they had created a monster. Within months, they fled Rome. They gathered in the town of Anagni and later Fondi under the protection of French mercenaries. There, they issued a shocking declaration. They announced that the election of Urban VI was invalid. They claimed they had voted under the threat of death from the Roman mob. In September 1378, they held a second election. They chose Robert of Geneva, a powerful cardinal known primarily for his brutality as a military commander. He took the name Clement VII. Unable to take Rome by force, Clement and his cardinals packed their wealth and returned to Avignon. The unthinkable had happened. There were now 2 living, fully operational popes. This was the beginning of the Great Western Schism. 2 popes, 2 papal courts, 2 colleges of cardinals, 2 massive financial bureaucracies, both demanding taxes from the populations of Europe. Immediately, both Urban VI in Rome and Clement VII in Avignon excommunicated each other. They declared each other the Antichrist. But the true disaster was not theological. It was geopolitical. European monarchs were forced to choose sides, and their choices had nothing to do with religious legitimacy. They chose based entirely on political alliances and military strategy. France naturally supported the Pope in Avignon. Because France supported Avignon, their bitter enemy, England, immediately supported the Pope in Rome. Scotland, constantly at war with England, aligned with France and backed Avignon. The Holy Roman Empire and most of the Italian city-states backed Rome. Castile and Aragon eventually threw their weight behind Avignon. The map of Europe was perfectly cleaved in 2. The 100 Years' War between England and France bled seamlessly into the religious conflict. Armies marched under the banners of rival popes. The spiritual anxiety among the common people was absolute. According to Catholic doctrine, sacraments performed by an illegitimate priest were invalid. If your king supported the wrong pope, your baptisms, your marriages, and your last rites meant nothing. Millions of people believed they were condemned to hell, simply because of royal politics. The deadlock lasted for decades. When Urban VI died in Rome, his cardinals did not reconcile with Avignon. They elected a successor. When Clement VII died in Avignon, his cardinals did the exact same thing. The institution was paralyzed. Neither side would compromise. Neither side would resign. By 1409, the frustration within the church bureaucracy reached a breaking point. A group of cardinals from both Rome and Avignon went rogue. They abandoned their respective popes and convened a massive council in the city of Pisa. Their logic was simple. The council holds ultimate authority. We will depose both popes and elect a new, unifying figure. The Council of Pisa officially fired the Roman Pope and the Avignon Pope. They then elected a third man, Alexander V. The plan was meant to end the schism. Instead, it created a punchline. The popes in Rome and Avignon flatly refused to step down, declaring the Council of Pisa illegal. Now, there were 3. 3 popes, 3 courts, 3 bureaucracies draining the wealth of Europe. The papacy had become a laughingstock. The prestige built over a millennium was dissolving into ash. The institutional church had proven completely incapable of fixing itself. It required the intervention of secular geopolitical power. Enter Sigismund of Luxembourg, the King of Hungary, King of the Romans, and the future Holy Roman Emperor. Sigismund understood that a fractured church meant a fractured and vulnerable Europe. He used the immense weight of the imperial throne to force the issue. In 1414, he orchestrated the Council of Constance. This was not a mere gathering of priests. It was a massive geopolitical summit. Kings, dukes, scholars, and thousands of clergy descended on the city. The mandate was clear. The three-headed monster had to be destroyed. Through intense political coercion, military threats, and diplomatic maneuvering, the council went to work. The Pisan Pope, John XXIII, was forced to flee, hunted down, arrested, and imprisoned. The Roman Pope, Gregory XII, realizing he had no political cover left, agreed to formally resign. The Avignon Pope, Benedict XIII, stubbornly refused to quit. He retreated to a fortress in Spain, claiming he was the sole true pope until the day he died. But his royal backers abandoned him. He was officially deposed and ignored. Finally, in 1417, the council cleared the board. They elected Odo Colonna, a Roman noble, who took the name Martin V. The 39-year nightmare was over. The Catholic Church had one head once again. The institution survived, but the illusion of divine, unshakable authority was dead. For a generation, the people of Europe had watched the highest spiritual leaders on earth behave like corrupt warlords and political pawns. They had seen the papacy auctioned off to the highest bidder. The Western Schism proved that the Church was not an untouchable kingdom of God. It was a human institution, deeply flawed and entirely dependent on the swords and treasuries of secular kings. The absolute supremacy of the Pope would never be fully restored. The cracks in the foundation were now visible to everyone. Across Europe, scholars and priests began to question the very structure of the Church. If the papacy could be so easily broken, perhaps it was not necessary at all. The schism planted a seed of rebellion in the European mind. A seed that would incubate for exactly 1 century, waiting for a German monk named Martin Luther to strike the match. To see exactly how this crisis laid the groundwork for the ultimate religious rebellion, and how the unified church was permanently shattered into more than 45,000 different denominations. Watch our full documentary on the Christian split right here.